The evening train was a familiar blend of noise, motion, and the faint smell of metal and worn upholstery. Maya stood near the center of the carriage, clutching her bag close to her body the way one does when they want to shrink into the background. The day had been long and all she wanted was to get home, but an unsettling presence beside her was making the journey unbearable. A man had taken the space next to her, not because it was the only spot available, but because he seemed determined to be close, too close. Every time she shifted her position to put distance between them, he would subtly follow, closing the gap again. She felt his shoulder brush against hers more than once, and when she glanced at him out of the corner of her eye she caught him staring, not with the casual glance of a fellow commuter, but with the slow, deliberate look that makes your skin prickle. Her heartbeat quickened, and the air around her seemed heavier. She tried to focus on the rhythm of the train, the sway of the carriage, anything to ignore the knot tightening in her stomach. The crowd offered no comfort. People were standing shoulder to shoulder, yet somehow she felt completely isolated. A few passengers might have noticed the man's behavior, but they avoided eye contact as if pretending not to see would make it disappear. Maya's mind raced through possibilities. Should she speak up, move to another spot, call someone? But the thought of drawing attention to herself and provoking a confrontation in this enclosed space was terrifying. The man's smirk deepened as though he sensed her discomfort and enjoyed it. Each small movement of the train became an excuse for him to lean closer, to let his arm brush against hers again. She shifted her bag to form a barrier, but it didn't help. His presence was like a shadow that wouldn't detach, a creeping intrusion she couldn't shake. Maya felt a bead of sweat slide down her back despite the cool air from the train's vents. She wished desperately for the ride to end, for the doors to open so she could escape, but they still had several stops to go. In the blur of her anxiety she scanned the carriage again, hoping for a sign that someone might intervene. People were staring into their phones, gazing out the windows, or chatting quietly among themselves, cocooned in their own worlds. She swallowed hard, trying to summon courage, but the words stuck in her throat. The man's proximity felt like a silent trap, one she couldn't move away from without making it obvious she was fleeing. Her grip on her bag tightened until her fingers ached. She tried to turn her body slightly to face away from him, but he adjusted as if to block her from moving further. It was a subtle, almost invisible aggression, yet it screamed its intention loud enough in her mind. The seconds stretched, each one feeling longer than the last. She wondered if this would be one of those stories she would later tell with a shaky voice, or if she would just bury it in her memory and pretend it never happened. The hum of the train grew louder, and with it her awareness of every sound, every shuffle of feet, every faint exhale around her. She could feel her pulse in her temples, a steady drumbeat of unease. She wanted someone, anyone, to notice, to step forward and say something. She didn't want to cause a scene, but she needed this to stop. The moment felt fragile, like a thin piece of glass that could shatter into chaos with the wrong move. Her thoughts spiraled. Would the man get off at her stop? Would he follow her? She imagined the worst scenarios, each more frightening than the last. The fear was no longer just about the moment. It was about what could come next. She kept her eyes fixed on a random spot on the floor as though ignoring him might erase him from existence, but his presence loomed like a dark cloud at her side. In that tense silence between them, it felt as if the entire carriage was holding its breath. Maya wasn't sure how much longer she could hold hers. The helplessness was suffocating, but somewhere deep down she still clung to the smallest hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would notice and care enough to act before the next stop arrived. Little did she know that hope was about to take the shape of a stranger who wasn't willing to stay silent. Daniel sat at the far end of the train carriage, his daughter Lily perched beside him with her little legs swinging above the floor. It was their usual routine after a long day. Pick her up from school, take the train home, talk about what she learned, and decide together what to make for dinner. Tonight, Lily was excitedly telling him about a drawing competition at school, her tiny hands gesturing wildly as she described the colors she wanted to use. Daniel was half listening, half keeping an eye on the people around them, a habit he had developed since becoming a single father. He had learned to always be alert, always aware. As Lily spoke, something in the corner of his vision caught his attention, a subtle, uncomfortable shift in the body language of a young woman standing a few feet away. Daniel's eyes sharpened, the way she held her bag tight, the slight tilt of her shoulders away from the man next to her, the faint tension in her jaw. It wasn't casual discomfort. It was fear. He didn't need to hear words to know something was wrong. The man beside her was leaning in too much, taking up more space than necessary, deliberately brushing against her despite the crowd not being tight enough to justify it. Daniel saw the way she inched away, only for the man to follow. A slow burn of anger began in his chest. He glanced at Lily. She had stopped talking, her young eyes following his gaze. She knew her father well enough to sense when something wasn't right. Without needing to say it, she understood to stay put. Daniel rose to his feet. His movements were calm, unhurried, but there was an unspoken firmness in the way he stepped forward. The distance between him and the young woman closed quickly. He positioned himself directly between her and the man, his broad frame forming an unshakable barrier. Turning slightly toward her, he asked in a steady voice, "Is everything okay here?" The man's expression twisted into mock amusement. He gave a short laugh, the kind meant to dismiss and provoke at the same time. "Mind your own business," he muttered, his tone dripping with disdain. But Daniel didn't flinch. He had no intention of walking away. He didn't raise his voice, but the way he stood, shoulders squared, eyes locked, made it clear that he wasn't there to make polite conversation. The woman looked at Daniel, and in that brief exchange, he could see the relief in her eyes. She didn't need to explain. He knew, and she knew he understood. The man shifted uncomfortably, perhaps realizing that the quiet, unassuming father was not as easy to dismiss as he'd hoped. The air between them grew tense, and Daniel's calmness was almost more intimidating than anger would have been. Lily stayed in her seat, watching with a mix of worry and pride. She had seen her father step into situations before, but there was something different about this one. The crowded carriage was starting to take notice. A few passengers, sensing the confrontation, began to pay attention. Someone at the far end raised their phone slightly, ready to record if things escalated. Daniel's hand rested casually on the rail beside the woman, not touching her but clearly marking the space as protected. The man's smirk faltered. This wasn't going to be easy prey anymore. Daniel could feel the weight of the man's stare, the silent challenge behind it, but he didn't move. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was simply making it impossible for this man to continue what he was doing. It was a moment suspended between action and decision, and Daniel knew he had to stand his ground without letting the situation spiral. For him, it wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing what any decent human being should do when they see someone in trouble: step forward, even if it means stepping into someone else's mess. Lily's quiet gaze anchored him, reminding him that every choice he made was also a lesson for her. Without realizing it, he was teaching her what courage looks like when it's quiet, steady, and unshakable. The man's glare hardened, his voice losing its mocking edge and turning sharper. "I said mind your business," he repeated, stepping forward as if to challenge Daniel. But Daniel didn't shift so much as an inch. His posture was steady, shoulders squared, and his calm eyes met the man's with an unwavering steadiness that carried more weight than anger ever could. Maya, standing just behind him, felt a wave of relief that almost made her knees give out. It wasn't just that someone had stepped in, it was that this stranger was standing so firmly without hesitation, as though defending her was the most natural thing in the world. Daniel didn't raise his voice, but his tone carried authority that made the surrounding passengers turn their heads. "You need to back off," he said, the words simple but unshakable. The man's jaw tightened. There was a flicker of uncertainty in his expression now, as if the balance of power had shifted in a way he hadn't expected. This wasn't the usual silence and avoidance he was used to. People were watching. A few had their phones out, discreetly recording. The hum of the train was now underscored by a faint tension in the air, the kind that makes every movement feel amplified. Maya's breathing began to steady, though her hand still trembled around the strap of her bag. The presence of this man between her and her harasser was like a shield she didn't know she needed so badly until now. She glanced up at Daniel, noticing how he never broke eye contact with the other man. It wasn't an aggressive stare. It was controlled, measured, but impossible to ignore. His body language made it clear this wasn't a discussion, and there would be no room for negotiation. The harasser's smirk returned briefly, though it was weaker now, more defensive than confident. "Whatever, man," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. He stepped back a fraction, his eyes darting to the people who were still watching, some openly now. Daniel didn't move to chase him off or escalate. He simply remained in place, a human barrier that made it impossible for the man to get near Maya again. After a few more tense seconds, the man let out a sharp, annoyed exhale and moved toward the opposite end of the carriage. His steps were heavy, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet that followed. The tension began to dissolve, replaced by a subtle current of relief among those who had been silently observing. Some of them went back to their phones, others exchanged brief glances, and the recording stopped. Maya let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice quiet but thick with sincerity. Daniel gave her a small nod, his expression softening slightly as the danger passed. He didn't make a big show of it, didn't scold the man as he left, didn't demand recognition. It was clear that for him, stepping in was not about being praised. It was simply about doing what was right. Lily, still in her seat, beamed at her father with quiet pride. She had seen him help people before, but something about this moment settled deep in her memory. She knew she'd remember how her dad had stood up for a stranger, not with yelling or threats, but with the kind of calm strength that made people listen without question. As the train rattled on toward the next stop, the rhythm of the ride returned, but for Maya, the world felt a little different now. She knew that if Daniel hadn't been there, the ride might have ended very differently. She tightened her grip on her bag, not from fear this time, but from a sudden swell of gratitude for the man who had stepped forward without thinking twice, and for the reminder that courage can be quiet and still leave a lasting mark. When the train finally slowed and the automated voice announced the next stop, Maya felt her body unclench slightly. The doors would open soon, and with them would come fresh air and distance from the ugly tension that had filled the carriage. Daniel glanced back at Lily, who was already hopping off her seat, her backpack slung over one shoulder. He then turned to Maya and spoke in a tone that was both polite and protective. "Let us walk you out," he said. She hesitated for a moment, not wanting to trouble him, but the genuine concern in his eyes made it hard to refuse. The thought of walking alone through the dimly lit platform after what had just happened sent a shiver down her spine, so she gave a small nod. As the doors slid open, the three of them stepped out together into the bustle of the station. Commuters rushed past, their footsteps echoing against the tiled floor, the sharp scent of metal and brake dust still lingering in the air. Daniel kept an easy pace beside her, not crowding but staying close enough that she knew she was safe. Lily skipped a little ahead, glancing back every few steps to make sure they were following. The girl's cheerful energy was a stark contrast to the heaviness that had weighed on Maya only minutes earlier. When they reached the escalator, Maya turned to face Daniel fully. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier now, but carrying the depth of her gratitude. "Not everyone would have done what you did." Daniel shrugged, a small, almost self-conscious smile crossing his face. "We have to look out for each other," he replied simply, as if the matter needed no further explanation. To him it was obvious, there was a wrong happening in front of him, and he couldn't just watch. Before Maya could respond, Lily chimed in with a grin. "My dad's a hero," she announced proudly, her voice carrying over the hum of the station. The declaration made Maya laugh, a soft, genuine sound that surprised even her. She had been holding so much tension that the laugh felt like a release, a reminder that there was still warmth in the world. Daniel shook his head with a quiet chuckle. "Maybe just a dad who doesn't like bullies," he said, but Lily's beaming face suggested she disagreed. At the top of the escalator they reached the exit where their paths would split. Maya paused, wanting to hold on to the moment a little longer. She knew she might never see them again, but she also knew she wouldn't forget them, especially not the way Daniel had stood up for her without a hint of hesitation. "You really don't know what this means to me," she said softly. Daniel met her gaze and gave a nod that conveyed both understanding and humility. As they parted ways, Maya watched them walk toward the parking lot, Lily chattering away again, her small hand swinging in her father's. The sight left Maya with a quiet sense of reassurance, as if the world, despite its shadows, still held pockets of light. The incident on the train had been frightening, but it had also revealed something rare, a willingness to step forward when most would step back. Walking toward her own exit, Maya felt different from when she'd first boarded the train. The fear had been replaced by a memory of kindness and the realization that sometimes strangers can leave a deeper mark than people you've known for years. And somewhere deep inside she hoped that if she were ever in a position to protect someone else, she would remember this moment and choose to act, just as Daniel had, without thinking twice.